Let's understand circulatory system of man. What is circulatory system? The circulatory system is responsible for transporting materials throughout the entire body. Why do we need circulatory system? In order to transport substances from one part of the body to the other, the circulatory system has evolved. In man, the circulatory system is composed of the heart, the blood vessels namely arteries, veins and capillaries, the blood, and the lymph. William Harvey in 1628 discovered the circulation of blood in man. Until then it was thought that the body is a blood-filled entity, and the blood is stagnant in it. William Harvey, 1578 to 1657, was an English physician. He was the first to give the details of blood circulation, the properties of blood and the pumping of blood by the heart. The blood. Blood is the river of life, providing the internal environment to the body. Blood is the connective tissue, consisting of the fluid part, the plasma, and the solid components, the blood cells. Plasma. The liquid component of blood, the plasma is composed of water, organic substances, inorganic substances, etc. Our blood contains approximately 55% of plasma, less than 1% of white blood cells and platelets, and approximately 45% of red blood cells. The real image of plasma is shown here. The important organic substances of plasma are the plasma proteins namely globulin for immunity, fibrinogen for blood clotting, and albumin for water balance. Blood cells. There are three types of blood cells, namely red blood cells, white blood cells, and blood platelets, freely floating in the plasma. Let's learn about them. Red blood cells, erythrocytes. Red blood cells are circular, biconcave and disc-shaped. While the young red blood cells have nuclei, the matured ones are without nuclei. The red blood pigment hemoglobin is fully packed in the red blood cells. They are concerned with carriage of respiratory gases. White blood cells, leukocytes. White blood cells are rhomboid in shape with prominent nuclei. White blood cells are concerned with phagocytosis of engulfing the germs and producing antibodies to resist the germs entering the body. Blood platelets, thrombocytes. Platelets are irregular, broken up pieces of certain giant cells. They are concerned with blood clotting to prevent the loss of blood. Let's consider few more types of blood cells. These are neutrophil, monocyte, basophil, eosinophil, lymphocyte. Blood vessels. The blood circulates round the body and reaches each and every organ through the blood circulatory system, which consists of heart and the blood vessels. There are three distinct types of blood vessels, namely arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries. Arteries carry the blood from the heart to different parts of the body. Since the blood emerges from the heart under high pressure, the arteries have thick elastic walls. They are the branches of aorta, supplying oxygenated blood to the different regions of the body, except pulmonary artery, which carries deoxygenated blood. The aorta branches into arteries. Arteries branch into arterioles. Arterioles branch into fine tubes, called metarterioles. The metarterioles end up in the tiny blood vessels, called capillaries. Capillaries. On reaching an organ or tissue, the arteries divides into smaller and smaller vessels to bring the blood in contact with all the individual cells. The smallest vessels have walls, which are 1 cell thick. These tiny blood vessels form a network, called capillary network, around the tissues. To enable the passage of substances from the blood into the tissues. Exchange of material between the blood and surrounding cells takes place across the thin wall of capillaries. The capillaries then join together to form veins that convey the blood away from the organ or tissue. Veins. The veins drain the blood from different parts of the body to the heart. It collects the blood from different organs and bring it back to the heart. They do not require thick walls because the blood is no longer under pressure. Instead, they have valves that ensure that blood flows only into one direction. The capillaries reunite to form venules, which drain the deoxygenated blood from the tissues. The small venules united with the big veins open into superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Except the pulmonary veins, all of the veins carry deoxygenated blood. Let's quickly take a look at the difference between arteries and veins. Arteries. Veins. Arteries. It carries blood from the heart to the organs. Veins. It carries blood from the organs to the heart. Arteries. It carries oxygenated blood except pulmonary artery. Veins. It carries deoxygenated blood except pulmonary veins. Arteries. The wall is thick and elastic. Veins. The wall is thin and less elastic. Arteries. It is found deep inside the muscles. Veins. It is found superficially. Arteries. Valves are absent. Veins. Valves are present. The heart. The human heart is a hollow, fibro-muscular organ. It is conical in shape. The heart is covered by a protective double-walled sac, called pericardium, filled with pericardial fluid. The heart is made up of special type of muscles, called cardiac muscles. The partitions within the heart divide the heart into 4 chambers as auricles and ventricles. The right half of the heart receives and pumps off deoxygenated blood, and the left half of the heart receives and pumps out oxygenated blood. Here, blue color is referred as deoxygenated blood, and red color is referred as oxygenated blood. Auricles. These are thin-walled upper chambers. The auricles are divided into a right auricle and a left auricle by a partition called interauricular septum. Auricles are the receiving chambers of blood. Into the right auricle open the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, emptying the deoxygenated blood brought from different parts of the body. Into the left auricle open the pulmonary veins, emptying the oxygenated blood brought from the two lungs. Ventricles. These are thick-walled lower chambers of the heart. A partition called interventricular septum divides the ventricle into right and left ventricle. The ventricles pumped the blood out from the heart. From the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood is pumped into pulmonary artery to supply the two lungs. From the left ventricle, oxygenated blood is pumped into the aorta to supply the oxygenated blood to the different parts of the body through its branches. Apertures of the heart. Between the right auricle and right ventricle is found the right auriculoventricular aperture, and between the left auricle and left ventricle is found the left auriculoventricular aperture. Valves of the heart. A tricuspid valve with 3 flaps is found in the right auriculoventricular aperture to regulate the flow of blood from right auricle to right ventricle and not backwards. A bicuspid valve or mitral valve with 2 flaps in the left auriculoventricular aperture regulates the flow of blood from left auricle to left ventricle and not backwards. At the base of the pulmonary artery is present the semilunar valve, which regulates the blood to flow from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. At the base of the aorta is present the aortic valve to regulate the flow of blood from left ventricle into aorta. Working of heart. The most vital function of heart is heartbeats, which takes place all time, throughout one's life. The closure of the valves of the heart produce 2 different cardiac sounds, as lub and dub. The human heart beats 72 times in a minute at rest. Heartbeat is an inherent capacity of the heart, begun and conducted by the specialized muscle bundle in the heart called cardiac muscles. The sequence of event, which takes place during the completion of one heartbeat, is called the cardiac cycle. It involves repeated rhythmic contraction and relaxation of heart muscle. An inside view of human heart is illustrated here. Contraction is called systole, and relaxation is called diastole. On the right hand side, the conditions of auricular diastole and ventricle systole are shown. When the auricles are filled with blood, they are in relaxation phase. This is called auricular diastole. By now, ventricles will push the blood into aorta and pulmonary artery by their contraction. This is called ventricular systole. Whereas on the left hand side, the condition of auricular systole and ventricular diastole are shown. When the auricles contract, the blood is pushed into the ventricles through the bicuspid and tricuspid valves. This is called auricular systole. Since the blood is now present in ventricles, it leads to ventricular relaxation, which is called ventricular diastole. Let's discuss the cardiac cycle in detail. The cardiac cycle involves the following. Joint diastole. During the time when the muscles of all 4 chambers are relaxed, the blood returning to the heart under low pressure in the veins enters the 2 atria. Blood from large veins, called vena cava, pours into right atrium. This blood comes from head, upper body part, and lower body parts, where oxygen has been used up, and the blood is free from oxygen, that is, deoxygenated. Thus, Deoxygenated blood enters the right atrium. At the same time, the pulmonary vein from lungs pours oxygenated blood into the left atrium. Thus, the oxygenated blood enters the left atrium. Atrial systole. As the right and left atria fill with blood, pressure in them rises so that the valves between left atrium and left ventricle, which is bicuspid valve, and between right atrium and right ventricle, which is tricuspid valve, open and the atria contract. Atrial contraction, also known as atrial diastole, forces pumping of the oxygenated blood from right atrium into the right ventricle through tricuspid valve, and oxygenated blood from left atrium into left ventricle through bicuspid valve. Almost immediately the ventricles contract. This is called ventricular systole. During contraction of ventricle, the deoxygenated blood from right ventricle flows to the lungs through pulmonary artery, and the oxygenated blood from left ventricle is distributed to all the parts of the body through the largest artery, called aorta. Blood pressure. More to know. What is blood pressure? The force that blood exerts against the wall of a vessel is called blood pressure. This pressure is much greater in arteries than in veins. The pressure of blood inside the artery during ventricular systole contraction is called systolic pressure. Pressure in artery during ventricular diastole relaxation is called diastolic pressure. Blood pressure is measured as systolic and diastolic pressures. You most often will see blood pressure numbers written with the systolic number above or before the diastolic number, such as 120 by 80 mm of mercury. The mmHg is millimeters of mercury, the units used to measure blood pressure. The table below shows normal blood pressure numbers for adults. Categories for blood pressure levels in adults measured in millimeters of mercury, or mmHg. Blood pressure is measured with an instrument called sphygmomanometer. How to measure blood pressure? Before you take your blood pressure reading, make sure you are relaxed and comfortable. If you are anxious or uncomfortable, this will make your blood pressure rise temporarily. When you are taking your reading, keep still and silent. Moving and talking can affect your reading. Steps to be followed. To begin, place the cuff on your bare upper arm, 1 inch above the bend of your elbow. Once the cuff is on, place the disc of the stethoscope face down, under the cuff just to the inner side of your upper arm. Air is then blown into the cuff, and increasing pressure and tightening is felt on the upper arm. Put a stethoscope to your arm, and listens to the pulse while the air is slowly let out again. Let the pressure fall 2 mm per second, while listening for your heart sounds. When you hear the first heartbeat, note the pressure on the instrument, that is the systolic blood pressure. This sound will slowly become more distant, and finally disappear. The diastolic pressure is measured from the moment then you are unable to hear the beating sound. Note your diastolic pressure. What is called HBP, or high blood pressure? High blood pressure is also called hypertension and is caused by the constriction of arterioles, which results in increased resistance to blood flow. It can lead to the rupture of an arteries and internal bleeding. How to prevent high blood pressure. Blood pressure tends to rise with age. Following a healthy lifestyle helps some people delay or prevent this rise in blood pressure. People who have high blood pressure can take steps to control it and reduce their risk for related health problems. Key steps include following a healthy lifestyle, having ongoing medical care, and following your treatment plan.